You know, when we hear the word narcissist, our minds usually jump to someone obsessed with selfies, someone who just can't stop talking about themselves. But that's just the very top layer. So today, we're going to peel back all those layers of the onion to get to the complex and often really devastating clinical reality behind that pop culture idea. Let's get started. Believe it or not, this idea is ancient. It all goes back to the Greek myth of Narcissus, this incredibly handsome guy who turned down everyone who fell for him. As a punishment, the gods cursed him to fall in love with his own reflection in a pool of water, and he couldn't leave it. He just wasted away staring at himself. It's kind of the perfect metaphor, right? A self-obsession so total that it becomes its own prison.
Okay, so how do we get from a tragic myth to a formal modern diagnosis you'd find in a textbook? Well, it took centuries of psychological study, and it all led to what we now officially call narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. So what does that actually mean in a clinical sense?
Right, so according to the DSM-5, which is basically the go-to manual for mental health professionals, this is the core of it. We're not just talking about arrogance or someone who's a little bit cocky. This is a persistent, deeply ingrained pattern of behavior. And it's not really about having high self-esteem. It's actually about a really fragile self-esteem that needs constant praise from the outside world just to stay afloat. And you might be thinking, this is some super rare thing, but it's really not. Studies suggest that NPD might affect up to 6.2% of the population. Now think about that. When you consider the ripple effect on their families, their workplaces, their communities, the true impact is just massive. This is way more than a personal quirk. It's a problem that ends up affecting all of us. So what is one of the most confusing and, frankly, damaging parts of being around someone with NPD? It's this profound duality. The person the world sees is often the complete, total opposite of the person their loved ones experience behind closed doors. And this is where it gets so jarring. In public, they can be the most charming person in the room, so confident, so generous, a real pillar of the community. But in private, that mask just drops. And it's replaced by constant criticism, emotional coldness, even explosive rage. For the people closest to them, this creates this incredibly isolating reality where they feel like no one would ever believe them because that public persona is just so convincing. You know the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde comparison? It's used a lot for a reason. It's spot on. It really is a dizzying, constant switch between that public respectability and this private monstrosity. And what that does is it keeps the victim completely off balance, always doubting what they're seeing, trapped between hoping that Dr. Jekyll will come back and just dreading Mr. Hyde's next appearance. Now, it's so important to understand that this behavior isn't random. This push and pull, this charm and cruelty, it all follows a predictable, almost methodical pattern. It's designed to establish and maintain control. So let's break down how this cycle actually works. This chaos, it's not chaos at all. It follows a chillingly predictable four-stage pattern. It all starts with idealization, which you might have heard called love bombing. This is where they just shower you with affection, making you feel like you've met your absolute soulmate. But then things shift to devaluation. The criticism starts, the abuse creeps in, and it just chips away at your self-worth. Once you're emotionally drained, the discard happens, and it's often brutal and out of nowhere. But it's rarely over. That last step is hoovering, where they try to suck you back in with all these promises just to start the whole horrible cycle all over again. So you have to be asking, why on earth would anyone stay in a cycle like that? Well, the answer lies in a really powerful psychological trick called intermittent reinforcement. It's the exact same thing that gets people hooked on slot machines. Those little unpredictable moments of affection, those brief glimpses of the good times, they act like random rewards. It keeps the victim emotionally hooked, always pulling the lever, hoping for the next win. And it creates this powerful addiction-like trauma bond that is incredibly hard to break. Okay, but here's a huge mistake a lot of us make. We think NPD always looks the same. That classic, loud, arrogant stereotype? That's just one version. The disorder can actually show up in several very distinct and sometimes really surprising ways. First, you've got your classic grandiose or overt type. That's the one you picture in your head, loud, proud, dominant. But then there's the vulnerable or covert type. This person is hypersensitive and actually manipulates people by playing the victim. You might also run into the communal narcissist. They get their admiration by seeming incredibly altruistic, like a savior, but it's all just a performance to get praise. And finally, there's the malignant type, which is considered the most dangerous because it combines narcissism with sadistic and antisocial traits. And this really gets to the heart of a massive misunderstanding. The way we throw around the word narcissist today has really watered it down. It's come to mean someone who's just vain or annoying. But as we're seeing, clinical NPD is a whole different ballgame. It's not rooted in self-love. It's rooted in a deep-seated insecurity. It's not just harmlessly annoying. It's often calculated cruelty. And it's not just being self-centered. It's a profound, destructive lack of empathy that lets them exploit other people.
So someone with NPD rarely operates in a vacuum. To maintain their false reality and to control their victims, they often build an entire social support system around them. This system is the final and maybe the most insidious layer of the onion.
This system relies on two key roles. First, you have enablers. These are the people who, for whatever reason, just look the other way or make excuses for the abuse. Their silence basically says, yeah, this is okay. And then you have the flying monkeys. These are people who are actively manipulated into doing the narcissist's dirty work. And yeah, that term, flying monkeys, it's exactly what you think. It comes straight from The Wizard of Oz, where the Wicked Witch sends her monkeys to do her dirty work. In the exact same way, a person with NPD will get friends, family, or even colleagues to spread gossip, to spy on the victim, and to enforce their version of events. And a lot of times these agents don't even realize they're being used. For the victim, the impact of the social web is just devastating. It completely isolates them. It makes them feel like they're the crazy one. It's basically gaslighting by proxy. This whole social network reinforces the narcissist's power and makes it incredibly, incredibly difficult for the victim to be heard, to be believed, and ultimately to escape. Look, understanding these dynamics, from the internal mask they wear to the external social network they build, that's the first real step. It moves us beyond just a simple, trendy label and towards seeing the destructive mechanics really at play. And that leaves us with a final and pretty important question. Now that we can see these patterns, where in our own lives, at work, in our families, in our communities, might we find the systems that allow them to continue?